The morning Katherine Rosewood walked into the Petaluma, California town, meeting wearing trousers instead of a dress. Every head turned, and every conversation stopped, as if someone had fired a gunshot through the ceiling. It was March of 1876, and the small California town nestled in the rolling hills north of San Francisco had strict ideas about how a woman should dress, speak, and behave. Katherine had already tested those boundaries more than once since arriving 6 months earlier to claim the property her late uncle had left her. But this particular choice sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. The room smelled of tobacco and boot leather, and the only other woman present was Mrs. Harriet Milton, the mayor's wife, who gasped so loudly it echoed off the wooden walls. "Miss Rosewood, this is highly inappropriate," Mayor Milton said, his face turning the color of a ripe tomato. He stood at the front of the room, one hand gripping the podium as if it might save him from the scandal unfolding before his eyes. Katherine strode forward, her boots clicking against the floorboards. She had tucked a simple white shirt into the brown trousers, and her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid rather than the elaborate styles most women favored. At 22 years old, she had learned that practicality mattered more than appearances when you were trying to run a cattle ranch on your own. "What's inappropriate, Mayor Milton, is holding a meeting about water rights without inviting all the property owners," Katherine said, her voice clear and steady. "My ranch depends on access to Willow Creek just as much as any other operation in this valley." A murmur rippled through the crowd of men. Some looked scandalized, others amused, but one man near the back of the room watched her with something that looked like admiration. Mason Zeller had noticed Katherine the first week she arrived in town, and he had been noticing her ever since. Mason was 26, tall and lean from years of working cattle and breaking horses. His family ranch bordered Katherine's property to the east, and he had seen her out riding her fence lines, checking her cattle, and doing all the work that most people assumed a woman could not or should not do. While others in town whispered about how scandalous and improper she was, Mason found himself drawn to her determination and spirit. "Miss Rosewood, this meeting is for ranchers and businessmen," Mayor Milton said, emphasizing the last word. "Perhaps your foreman could represent your interests." "I don't have a foreman," Katherine replied. "I run my own ranch, as you well know. I have 50 head of cattle, clear title to my land, and every legal right to be here." "A woman running a ranch," someone muttered from the crowd. "Unnatural, that's what it is." Mason pushed away from the wall where he had been leaning. "Seems to me that if Miss Rosewood owns property affected by these water rights, she has every reason to be here." His voice carried across the room, deep and confident. Several men turned to look at him, some nodding in agreement, others frowning. Katherine's eyes met Mason's for a brief moment, and something passed between them, a spark of recognition and understanding. She had seen him around town, had noticed him watching her with those thoughtful gray eyes, but they had never spoken directly. "Thank you, Mr. Zeller," Katherine said, turning back to the mayor. "I intend to stay and participate in this discussion." The mayor's jaw worked as if he were chewing tough meat, but he seemed to recognize he was fighting a losing battle. "Very well. Take a seat, Miss Rosewood, but I expect proper decorum." Katherine sat in one of the empty chairs near the front, very aware of the eyes boring into her back. The meeting continued, with various ranchers voicing concerns about water access during the dry season and proposing a rotation system for irrigation. Katherine listened carefully, taking notes in a small leather journal she had brought with her. When the time came for discussion, she raised her hand. The mayor looked as if he wanted to ignore her, but finally he acknowledged her with a curt nod. If we implement this rotation system, it should be based on the size of each operation and their actual water needs, not just who has been here the longest, Katherine said. My ranch is smaller than most of yours, so I need less water, but I still need reliable access. And what would a woman know about water management? Asked Bernard Crawford, who owned the largest ranch in the area. He was in his 50s, with a hard face and harder opinions. I know that water flows downhill, Mr. Crawford, Katherine said evenly. I know that during the dry months Willow Creek runs low. I know that if the larger operations upstream take more than their share, the smaller ranches downstream suffer. That's not just common sense, it's basic fairness. Mason spoke up again. Miss Rosewood makes a good point. The Zeller Ranch sits upstream, but we've always been careful not to divert more water than we actually need. Seems reasonable that everyone should operate the same way. Katherine glanced back at him, surprised to find an ally. Mason met her gaze and gave her a small nod. She felt something flutter in her chest, but she pushed the feeling aside and focused on the meeting. The discussion continued for another hour, with Katherine contributing several more times. Despite the initial resistance, some of the men seemed to recognize that her ideas had merit. By the end of the meeting, a committee had been formed to draw up a formal water sharing agreement, and Katherine had been included as a member, though several men had grumbled about it. As people filed out of the meeting hall, Katherine gathered her journal and prepared to leave. She was aware of Mason Zeller moving through the crowd toward her, and her heart beat a little faster. Miss Rosewood, he said, removing his hat as he approached. Up close, she could see that his eyes were not just gray but had flecks of blue in them, like a winter sky. His dark hair was slightly too long, touching his collar, and he had the weathered look of a man who spent most of his time outdoors. Mr. Zeller, she replied, extending her hand for a handshake rather than waiting for him to bow over it as was customary. After a moment's surprise, he shook her hand firmly. His palm was calloused and warm. That took courage, what you did today, Mason said. Most people in this town don't take kindly to having their traditions challenged. Then perhaps it's time for some new traditions, Katherine said. I didn't come all the way from Boston to be told I can't run the property that legally belongs to me. Boston, Mason said, his mouth quirking into a smile. That explains the accent and the stubbornness. I prefer to call it determination, Katherine said, but she found herself smiling back. There was something easy about talking to Mason, none of the condescension or barely concealed hostility she usually encountered from men in town. Determination, then, Mason agreed. Are you heading back to your ranch now? I'm riding that direction myself. I could escort you if you'd like. Katherine's first instinct was to refuse. She had been taking care of herself for months now, and she did not need a man to protect her on the short ride home. But something in Mason's expression told her the offer was not about protection but about companionship, and she surprised herself by accepting. That would be fine, she said. They walked together to where their horses were tied outside. Katherine's mare was a pretty chestnut she had named Copper, while Mason rode a tall bay gelding. He helped her mount, though she did not really need the assistance, and then swung easily into his own saddle. As they rode out of town, the tension Katherine had been carrying in her shoulders began to ease. The March afternoon was mild and pleasant, with wildflowers beginning to bloom in the meadows alongside the road. The town of Petaluma sat in a valley surrounded by rolling hills, with good grazing land and adequate water most of the year. It was beautiful country, and Katherine had fallen in love with it despite the difficulties she had faced. You've done well with your uncle's place, Mason said as they rode. I've seen you out working. You're not afraid of hard work. Work doesn't frighten me, Katherine said. Small-minded people do, though I'm learning to handle them too. Mason laughed, a genuine sound that made Katherine smile. I imagine you handle them just fine. You certainly put Mayor Milton in his place today. He means well, I suppose, Katherine said, but he cannot seem to grasp that women are capable of more than embroidery and hosting tea parties. Not all men think that way, Mason said quietly. Katherine looked over at him. No. In my experience, most do. Most haven't met a woman like you, Mason said. His eyes held hers for a moment before he looked away at the landscape. My mother ran our ranch for 3 years after my father died. I was only 12, too young to take over, and she kept the whole operation going until I was old enough to help properly. She taught me that strength and capability have nothing to do with whether you're wearing a dress or trousers. Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman, Katherine said softly. She was, Mason said. She passed 2 years ago, pneumonia. I'm sorry, Katherine said, and she meant it. She had lost both her parents to a fever outbreak when she was 19, and then her uncle had taken her in until his heart gave out the previous year. She understood the particular loneliness of being without family. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves and the call of birds in the nearby trees. When they reached the fork where the road split toward their respective properties, Mason pulled his horse to a stop. Miss Rosewood, he said, I wonder if you might allow me to call on you sometime. Properly, I mean. Katherine felt that flutter in her chest again. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, but she was cautious. Mr. Zeller, I appreciate your support today, but I should tell you that I have no intention of becoming some man's wife and giving up my independence. I've worked too hard for what I have. I'm not asking you to give up anything, Mason said. I'm just asking if I can come to dinner sometime and get to know you better. No expectations beyond that. Katherine studied his face, looking for any sign of deception or hidden motives, but she saw only honest interest. All right, she said finally. Sunday evening, if that suits you. 6 o'clock. I'll be there, Mason said, and his smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. They parted ways, and Katherine rode toward her ranch with a lightness in her heart she had not felt in a long time. She knew she was taking a risk, letting Mason Zeller into her life even a little bit, but something about him felt different from other men she had known. Over the next few days, Katherine found herself thinking about Mason more than she wanted to admit. She went about her daily work, tending to her cattle, repairing a section of fence that had come loose, and working in the vegetable garden she had started behind the small ranch house. But her mind kept drifting to his gray-blue eyes, and the way he had spoken about his mother with such respect and love. Sunday arrived with clear skies and warm sunshine. Katherine spent the afternoon preparing dinner, something she actually enjoyed, though she would never admit it to the town gossips who thought cooking was a woman's only worthwhile skill. She made a pot roast with vegetables from her garden and baked bread from scratch. She even picked wildflowers and arranged them in a mason jar on the table. At exactly 6 o'clock, she heard the sound of a horse approaching. She smoothed down her dress, one of only 3 she owned, a simple blue cotton that she saved for occasions when trousers would not do, and went to answer the door. Mason stood on her porch, hat in hand, looking freshly washed and wearing a clean shirt. He held a small package wrapped in brown paper. Miss Rosewood, he said, you look lovely. Thank you, Katherine said, stepping aside to let him in. And please call me Katherine. Miss Rosewood makes me feel like a schoolteacher. Only if you'll call me Mason, he replied, handing her the package. I brought you something. It's not much, just something I thought you might appreciate. Katherine unwrapped the package to find a book. its leather cover worn but well cared for. The title read Practical Cattle Ranching in California. She looked up at Mason in surprise and pleasure. "This is wonderful. I've been trying to find a copy of this." "I thought you might be able to use it," Mason said. "It belonged to my father." He made notes in the margins, things he learned over the years. Some of it might be helpful to you. Katherine opened the book and saw the handwritten notes Mason had mentioned. It was a deeply personal gift, and she felt touched by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you, Mason, truly." They sat down to dinner, and Katherine was pleased to see Mason eat with genuine appetite, complimenting her cooking in a way that felt sincere rather than obligatory. As they ate, they talked easily, sharing stories about their lives and their experiences with ranching. "I have to admit," Mason said, "I was curious about you from the moment you arrived in town. Most people who inherit property like your uncle's place would have just sold it and stayed back east. What made you decide to come out here and run it yourself?" Katherine considered the question as she sipped her coffee. "In Boston, my life was very prescribed. I was expected to find a suitable husband, manage his household, and never have an original thought of my own. When Uncle William left me his ranch, it felt like a door opening to a different kind of life. I could be my own person out here, make my own decisions. Yes, it's been harder than I expected, and yes, most people in town think I'm either crazy or scandalous, but I'm happier than I've ever been." "You don't seem crazy to me," Mason said, his eyes warm. "Brave, maybe, stubborn, definitely, but not crazy." "And what about you?" Katherine asked. "You could have dismissed me like the other ranchers did. Why didn't you?" Mason was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "I suppose because I saw something of my mother in you. That same fire, that same refusal to be told what you can or cannot do. And maybe because I'm tired of the way this town tries to keep everything exactly the same as it's always been. The world is changing, and we should change with it." "That's a progressive view for a cowboy," Katherine said with a smile. "I'm full of surprises," Mason replied. After dinner, they sat on Katherine's porch and watched the sun set over the hills. The sky turned shades of orange and pink, and the air cooled to a comfortable temperature. Mason told her stories about growing up on the ranch, about learning to ride and rope from his father, and about the challenges of keeping an operation running through droughts and harsh winters. Katherine found herself laughing at his anecdotes, charmed by the way he could find humor in difficult situations. "Tell me about Boston," Mason said. "What was your life like there?" Katherine leaned back in her chair. "Constrained. That's the word that comes to mind. Everything was about propriety and appearances. My parents were middle class, respectable but not wealthy. After they died, I went to live with my aunt and uncle. They meant well, but they had very fixed ideas about what my future should look like. They introduced me to suitable young men, took me to suitable social gatherings, and made it clear that my job was to marry well and reflect credit on the family." "But you didn't want that," Mason said. "I wanted something real," Katherine said. "Something that mattered. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Mason said. "That's what ranching is when you get down to it. Real work, real challenges, real satisfaction when you succeed." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead. Katherine felt something she had not expected to feel when she moved west. She felt the possibility of connection, of finding someone who understood her not despite her unconventional choices but because of them. When Mason finally stood to leave, he paused by his horse and turned back to Katherine. "I'd like to see you again if you're willing. Maybe next time I could show you my ranch, introduce you to my operation." "I'd like that," Katherine said, and she meant it with her whole heart. Over the following weeks, Mason and Katherine saw each other regularly. Sometimes he would ride over to help her with a difficult task on her ranch, like breaking a young horse she had acquired or repairing her barn roof. Other times she would visit his place, and he would show her his cattle operation, which was much larger and more established than hers. He never treated her as if she needed saving or managing. Instead, he shared his knowledge freely and asked for her opinions on his own decisions. The town noticed, of course. Tongues wagged about Katherine Rosewood and Mason Zeller spending so much time together. Some people speculated about an engagement, while others whispered that it was improper for an unmarried woman to be seen so often with a man, even in broad daylight with no chaperone. Katherine heard the gossip and ignored it, as she ignored most of the town's judgment. She had more important things to worry about, like the fact that one of her best cows had gone lame and needed careful nursing, or that the water committee meeting was coming up, and she needed to prepare her arguments for the allocation she needed. It was at the second water committee meeting that Katherine faced her biggest challenge yet to the town's traditions. The committee met at the town hall on a warm April evening. All the major ranchers were present, including Bernard Crawford, who had made his disdain for Katherine's participation abundantly clear. "Gentlemen," Crawford said, pointedly looking at Katherine as if to emphasize that she did not belong in that category, "I've drawn up a proposal for water allocation based on historical usage patterns." He laid out a large map on the table, showing Willow Creek and all the properties that bordered it. His proposal gave the largest shares to the oldest and biggest ranches, including his own, with the smallest shares going to the newer or smaller operations. Katherine studied the map carefully, her brow furrowed. "Mr. Crawford, this allocation would give my ranch only 3 hours of water access per week during the dry season. That's not nearly enough for 50 head of cattle." "Then perhaps you should consider selling your cattle," Crawford said. "Or better yet, sell your ranch to someone who can manage it properly." "My ranch is managed just fine," Katherine said, her voice sharp. "What's not fine is this proposal that seems designed to push smaller operations out of business." "Miss Rosewood, the larger ranches have been here longer and have established needs," Mayor Milton said, trying to sound reasonable. "We have to respect historical precedent." "Precedent isn't the same as fairness," Katherine countered. She pulled out her own notes and calculations. "I've researched the flow rate of Willow Creek, and even during the driest months, there's enough water for all of us if we allocate it based on actual need rather than who's been here the longest. My ranch may be small, but my cattle need just as much water per head as anyone else's." Mason, who had been studying Crawford's map, spoke up. "Katherine's right. This allocation formula doesn't make sense. The Zeller Ranch is shown here getting 6 hours a day, but we don't need that much. 3 hours would be plenty for our operation. That freed up water should go to the ranches that actually need it." "Are you saying you'd give up water rights to help her?" Crawford asked, gesturing at Katherine with barely concealed contempt. "I'm saying I'd support a fair system over one that's rigged to benefit the biggest players," Mason said firmly. "Isn't that what we're here for? To find a solution that works for everyone?" The debate went on for 2 more hours, with Katherine and Mason arguing for a more equitable system and Crawford and his allies defending the traditional approach. Finally, Mayor Milton called for a vote on Crawford's proposal. Katherine held her breath as the hands went up. The vote was split, with 4 in favor of Crawford's plan and 4 opposed. "As chairman of this committee, I'll have to cast the deciding vote," Mayor Milton said. He looked uncomfortable, his gaze moving between Crawford's expectant face and Katherine's determined one. After a long moment, he sighed. I vote to table this proposal and ask Mr. Zeller and Miss Rosewood to work together on an alternative plan to present at our next meeting." Crawford's face turned purple. "This is outrageous. That woman has no business determining water policy for this valley." "That woman has as much right as anyone else here," Mason said, his voice low and dangerous. "And I'd appreciate it if you'd show her some respect." For a moment, it looked as if Crawford might say something else, but he apparently thought better of it. He gathered his papers and stalked out of the meeting hall, followed by several of his supporters. After the meeting ended, Katherine and Mason stood outside under the stars. Katherine felt exhausted but also exhilarated. "We actually won," she said. "Or at least we didn't lose." "You were brilliant in there," Mason said. "The way you presented your research and stood your ground against Crawford." "I couldn't have done it without your support," Katherine said. She looked up at him, and in the moonlight his face was all strong lines and shadows. "Why are you helping me, Mason? It would be easier for you to side with the established ranchers." Mason stepped closer to her. "I think you know why," he said quietly. "Or you should know by now." Katherine's heart was pounding. "Tell me anyway." "Because I care about you, Katherine Rosewood," Mason said. "Because watching you fight for what you believe in makes me want to be a better man. Because when I think about my future, I see you in it, if you'll have me there." Katherine could barely breathe. No one had ever spoken to her like this before, with such honesty and vulnerability. "Mason, I'm not going to change. I'm not going to suddenly become a conventional woman who stays home and does what she's told." "I don't want you to change," Mason said. He reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I love who you are right now, exactly as you are. Your fire, your courage, your stubborn determination. I want to fan those flames, not put them out." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes, though she would have been hard-pressed to say whether they were tears of joy or relief or something else entirely. "I care about you too," she whispered. "More than I thought I could care about anyone." Mason's hand moved to cup her cheek, and Katherine leaned into his touch. "May I kiss you?" he asked. Instead of answering, Katherine rose up on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, but it quickly deepened as Mason wrapped his arms around her waist and pulled her closer. Katherine felt as if she were burning from the inside out, every nerve alive with sensation. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "Well," Katherine said, her voice shaky. "That was unexpected." Mason laughed, resting his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks." "You should have done it sooner," Katherine said and kissed him again. From that night forward, something shifted between them. They were still friends and allies, still worked together on the water allocation proposal, but now there was also romance blooming alongside their partnership. Mason courted Katherine openly, despite the continued disapproval of many townspeople. He brought her flowers, took her on picnics in the hills, and spent long evenings on her porch talking about everything and nothing. Katherine found herself experiencing emotions she had never allowed herself to feel before. She had always been so focused on independence and self-sufficiency that she had never considered how lonely that could be. With Mason, she did not have to choose between being herself and being loved. He offered her both, freely and without conditions. One evening in early May, they were riding together through Katherine's property, checking her cattle. The spring grass was lush and green, and the cattle were healthy and content. Mason had been teaching Katherine some of the finer points of herd management, and she was soaking up the knowledge eagerly. "You're a natural at this," Mason said, watching her expertly maneuver her horse to guide a stray calf back toward its mother. "Your uncle would be proud of what you've done with his place." "I hope so," Katherine said. "I never knew him that well. He left Boston when I was just a child, but I like to think he would have understood why I chose to come here and make a life for myself." As they rode back toward the ranch house, they saw a cloud of dust approaching from the direction of town. As it got closer, Katherine recognized Deputy Thomas Warren, who served under Sheriff Pete Morrison. Her stomach clenched with worry. A deputy riding out to her ranch could not mean good news. "Miss Rosewood," Deputy Warren said as he pulled his horse to a stop. He touched his hat brim politely. "Mr. Zeller." "Deputy," Katherine said. "What brings you out here?" "I'm afraid I have some troubling news," Warren said. "There's been some cattle rustling in the area." "Sheriff Morrison wanted me to warn all the ranchers to be on alert." "Rustling?" Mason asked sharply. "Where?" "Crawford's ranch and 2 smaller places to the south," Warren said. "They hit Crawford 2 nights ago, took about 20 head. Hit the other places last night, took smaller numbers." Katherine felt a chill despite the warm evening. Cattle rustling was a serious crime in ranching country, and rustlers could be dangerous if confronted. "Thank you for the warning, Deputy. I'll keep a close watch on my herd." "You might want to consider hiring some hands to help with night watch," Warren said. "A woman alone out here could be vulnerable." "She's not alone," Mason said firmly. "I'll make sure Katherine's property is protected." After the deputy left, Katherine and Mason discussed the situation. "I should hire someone to help watch the place at night," Katherine said. "You can't abandon your own ranch to protect mine." "I'll split my time," Mason said. "And I'll talk to some of the men who work for me, see if anyone wants to earn extra money doing night patrol here." "But Katherine, you need to be careful. Rustlers aren't just thieves. They can be violent." "I can handle a rifle," Katherine said, but even she had to admit the situation made her nervous. She had worked so hard to build up her small herd, and the thought of losing cattle to thieves made her furious. That night, Mason stayed on Katherine's ranch, bedding down in her barn to keep watch. Katherine tried to sleep but found herself lying awake, listening to every sound outside. Around midnight, she finally gave up and got dressed, then went out to the barn. Mason was sitting near the barn door, rifle across his lap, keeping watch over the pasture where Katherine's cattle were settled for the night. He looked up when she approached, and even in the dim light from his lantern, she could see the concern in his eyes. "You should be sleeping," he said. "So should you," Katherine replied. She sat down beside him on a hay bale. "I'm too worried to sleep. What if they come here next?" "Then they'll find me waiting," Mason said. "And they'll find a woman who's not afraid to defend what's hers." They sat together in companionable silence, watching the peaceful night. Katherine found herself leaning against Mason's shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I keep thinking about what Crawford said at the meeting," she said quietly. "About how I should sell my ranch. Maybe he's right. Maybe I'm not cut out for this." Mason turned to look at her, his expression fierce. "Don't you dare let fear or other people's narrow-mindedness make you doubt yourself. You've done an incredible job with this place, Katherine. You've built something real here, something that matters." "But what if I lose it all?" Katherine asked. "What if the rustlers take my cattle, or there's a drought, or 100 other things that could go wrong?" "Then you'll deal with it," Mason said. "That's what ranchers do. We face problems and we solve them. And you won't be doing it alone. You have me now, and I'm not going anywhere." Katherine looked up at him, searching his face in the lantern light. "Mason, we've only known each other for 2 months. How can you be so sure?" "Because I know what I feel," Mason said. He set the rifle aside and took both of her hands in his. "I love you, Katherine. I think I started falling in love with you that first day at the town meeting when you stood up to Mayor Milton. And every day since then, I've fallen a little bit more." Katherine felt her eyes fill with tears. "I love you too," she said. "I didn't think I could feel this way about anyone." I was so convinced that love meant giving up everything I wanted for myself. Not with me, Mason said. With me, love means supporting each other, building something together. I don't want you to give up your ranch or your independence. I want to stand beside you and help you achieve everything you're capable of. Katherine kissed him then, pouring all of her emotion into it. Mason responded with equal passion, his arms wrapping around her and holding her close. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. I want to marry you, Mason said. Not right away, not until you're ready, but I want you to know that's where my heart is. I want that too, Katherine said, but there's so much uncertainty right now with the rustlers and the water situation. Then we'll face it together, Mason said. And when things settle down, we'll talk about the future. Over the next week, tension in the valley grew as the rustlers struck 2 more times. Sheriff Morrison organized patrols and asked all the ranchers to work together to protect their property, which led to an uneasy alliance between people who had been arguing at water committee meetings. Katherine's ranch was not hit, partly because Mason and 2 of his ranch hands took turns keeping watch every night. During this time, Katherine continued to challenge town conventions in other ways. She attended a town council meeting to argue for funding to improve the schoolhouse, pointing out that education benefited everyone in the community, not just families with children. She also openly criticized the mayor's decision to deny a business license to a Chinese immigrant who wanted to open a restaurant, arguing that discrimination was wrong regardless of who it targeted. Each time Katherine took a stand, Mason was there supporting her. He did not always agree with every detail of her arguments, but he always respected her right to make them. And he always defended her right to be heard, even when it cost him friendships with more conservative members of the community. One afternoon in late May, Katherine was in town picking up supplies when she encountered Bernard Crawford on the street. He was with several other ranchers, and they appeared to have been drinking at the saloon. "Well, if it isn't the lady rancher," Crawford said, his words slightly slurred. "Still playing at being a man, I see." Katherine ignored him and tried to continue to the general store, but Crawford moved to block her path. "I'm talking to you, girl. You and Zeller have been causing all kinds of trouble with your ideas about water rights. Some of us are getting tired of it." "Then perhaps you should try listening to reason instead of clinging to outdated systems that only benefit you and your friends," Katherine said coolly. "Now, if you'll excuse me." "I won't excuse you," Crawford said, his face turning red. "You come into our town, acting like you know everything, turning good men like Mason Zeller against their own kind. You're nothing but trouble." "I'd say she's a damn sight more than you deserve in this town," said a voice from behind Crawford. Mason appeared, his expression dangerous. "And you'll step aside and let her pass, Crawford, unless you want to have a very public conversation about how you've been padding your cattle numbers to get more water allocation than you're entitled to." Crawford's face went from red to purple. "You accusing me of lying?" "I'm stating facts," Mason said. "I've seen your operation, Crawford. You don't have the numbers you claim. Now step aside." For a moment, it looked as if Crawford might take a swing at Mason, but apparently even drunk, he had enough sense to recognize he would lose that fight. He stepped aside, muttering curses under his breath. Mason offered Katherine his arm and they walked together to the general store. Katherine's hands were shaking slightly with anger and adrenaline, but she kept her head high. Inside the store, Mrs. Patterson, the shopkeeper's wife, gave them a sympathetic look. "Don't let Crawford get to you, dear," Mrs. Patterson said to Katherine. "He's been drinking more lately, worried about the rustlers, I expect, but that's no excuse for rudeness." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson," Katherine said, touched by the older woman's kindness. Not everyone in town disapproved of her, though sometimes it felt that way. As they left the store with Catherine's supplies, Mason said quietly, "I meant what I said about Crawford's cattle numbers. I've suspected for a while that he's been inflating his counts to justify larger water allocations." "Can you prove it?" Catherine asked. "Maybe," Mason said, "but it would cause a lot of conflict to pursue it." "More conflict than we're already causing?" Catherine asked with a wry smile. Mason laughed. "Fair point." That evening they sat on Mason's porch, watching the sun set over his ranch. The view from his place was spectacular, with the valley spread out below and the hills rising on all sides. Catherine had come to love this land with an intensity that surprised her, and she could not imagine living anywhere else. "I've been thinking," Mason said, "about what happens after we get married. I know you love your ranch and I love mine. We should talk about how to handle both properties." "I've been thinking about that too," Catherine said. "I don't want to give up my ranch, but I also understand that managing two separate operations would be difficult." "What if we didn't think of them as separate?" Mason said. "What if we combined them into one larger ranch? Your property has good water access and excellent grazing land. Mine has more acreage and better facilities. Together, we could build something really strong." Catherine considered this. "I'd want to be an equal partner, not just the rancher's wife who happens to own some land." "Of course," Mason said immediately. "We'd make all major decisions together. Your name on the deed, your voice in every choice. Equal partners in every way." "That's different from how most marriages work," Catherine said. "We're not most people," Mason pointed out, and Catherine had to smile at that truth. They spent the next hour discussing details and possibilities, planning a future that felt both exciting and real. Catherine felt a sense of contentment she had never experienced before. She had found not just love but true partnership with someone who saw her as an equal. The Rustler situation came to a dramatic conclusion 2 weeks later. Sheriff Morrison received a tip about the thieves' location, a box canyon about 15 miles north of town. He organized a posse that included Mason, several other ranchers, and his deputies. Catherine wanted to join them, but Mason convinced her to stay behind to protect her property in case the tip was a diversion. The confrontation with the rustlers was brief but intense. The thieves, a group of 5 men who had been operating throughout the region, attempted to flee when the posse arrived but were quickly surrounded. One of them fired a shot, and the posse returned fire. When it was over, 2 of the rustlers were wounded, one seriously, and the rest surrendered. Most of the stolen cattle were recovered, including 12 of Crawford's. Mason returned to Catherine's ranch late that night, exhausted but uninjured. Catherine met him at the door, relief flooding through her when she saw he was all right. She threw her arms around him, not caring about propriety or what anyone might think. "I was so worried," she said against his chest, "when I heard there had been shooting." "I'm fine," Mason said, holding her tight. "It's over. The rustlers are in custody and the cattle are being returned to their rightful owners." They stood there for a long moment, just holding each other. Finally, Catherine pulled back enough to look up at him. "I don't want to wait anymore," she said. "Let's get married, soon." Mason's face broke into a wide smile. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," Catherine said. "I love you and I want to start our life together. We can figure out all the details as we go, but I want to be your wife." "Then let's do it," Mason said. He kissed her thoroughly, and Catherine felt happiness bloom in her chest like wildflowers after rain. They were married 3 weeks later, on a beautiful June morning, in a simple ceremony at the Petaluma church. Catherine wore a dress she had made herself, cream-colored silk with lace at the collar and cuffs. Mason wore his best suit and looked so handsome that Catherine's breath caught when she saw him waiting at the altar. The wedding was small by town standards. Many of the more conservative townspeople did not attend, disapproving of Katherine and what she represented. But Mrs. Patterson came, and Deputy Warren, and several of the smaller ranchers who had supported Katherine at the water committee meetings. Mason's ranch hands were there, dressed in their Sunday best, and even Mayor Milton and his wife attended, which Katherine took as a sign that attitudes might slowly be changing. When Mason said his vows, promising to love and honor her as an equal partner, Katherine felt tears slide down her cheeks, and when she promised to stand beside him through all of life's challenges, she meant every word with her whole heart. After the ceremony, they had a modest reception at Mason's ranch house, which would soon be their shared home. There was music and dancing and food, and for a few hours, Katherine forgot about all the struggles and conflicts and simply enjoyed celebrating her marriage to the man she loved. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Bernard Crawford surprised everyone by showing up. He was sober and looked uncomfortable, but he approached Katherine and Mason with something that might have been respect in his expression. "I came to offer my congratulations," Crawford said gruffly, "and to apologize, Mrs. Zeller. I was wrong about you. You're tougher than I gave you credit for, and you've earned your place here." Katherine was so surprised she almost didn't know what to say. "Thank you, Mr. Crawford. That means a great deal." Crawford nodded and turned to Mason. "The Water Committee is meeting next week to vote on your allocation proposal. I'll be voting in favor of it. It's a fair system, and it's time I admitted that." After Crawford left, Katherine leaned against Mason in amazement. "Did that really just happen?" "I think you finally won him over," Mason said, grinning. "Or maybe you've just worn down his resistance." "Either way, I'll take it," Katherine said. Their first year of marriage was not easy. Combining two ranches meant a tremendous amount of work, from legally merging the properties to actually coordinating the operations. There were long days of hard labor, difficult decisions to make, and moments of frustration when they disagreed about the best approach to a problem. But through it all, Katherine and Mason remained true to their promise to be equal partners. They made major decisions together, and when they disagreed, they talked it through until they found a solution they both could accept. Mason never tried to override Katherine's judgment simply because he was the man, and Katherine learned to value Mason's experience and wisdom even when it differed from her own ideas. The new water allocation system was approved by the committee and implemented that summer. It proved to be fairer and more efficient than the old system, and even some of the ranchers who had initially opposed it admitted it worked well. Katherine took pride in knowing she had helped create something that benefited the entire community. As the months passed, Katherine found herself becoming more accepted in Petaluma. She would never be considered conventional, and there would always be people who disapproved of her, but gradually, she earned respect. Other women in town began to speak to her more freely, some even asking her advice about managing property or handling business matters. Katherine realized she was becoming a role model, showing other women that they could be more than society traditionally allowed. In the spring of 1877, Katherine discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a mixture of joy and apprehension. She wanted children, but she worried about how pregnancy and motherhood would affect her ability to work the ranch. Mason, as always, was supportive. "We'll figure it out," he said, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "Women have been having babies and working ranches since ranches existed. You won't have to do it alone." Katherine worked on the ranch through most of her pregnancy, though Mason and their ranch hands gradually took over the more physically demanding tasks. She found she enjoyed the enforced slowdown in some ways, as it gave her time to focus on other aspects of ranch management, like their breeding program and financial planning. Their son was born in November of 1877, a healthy baby boy they named Matthew William, after Mason's father and Catherine's uncle. Katherine fell in love with him instantly, marveling at his tiny fingers and the way he looked up at her with dark blue eyes. Motherhood changed Katherine, but not in the ways she had feared. She did not lose herself or her identity. Instead, she found new dimensions to her strength and capability. She learned to manage ranch business while nursing a baby, to conduct water committee meetings with Matthew sleeping in a basket beside her chair, to ride out and check on cattle with her son secure in a sling against her chest. The townspeople who had criticized Katherine for being unconventional were somewhat mollified by her motherhood, as if having a child made her more acceptable in their eyes. But Katherine did not change her ways to please them. She continued to wear trousers when working, continued to speak her mind at town meetings, continued to run her ranch as an equal partner with her husband. When Matthew was 6 months old, Katherine resumed riding and working cattle regularly. Mason's mother's sister, Aunt Sarah, had come to live with them and helped care for Matthew when both Katherine and Mason needed to be out on the range. It was an arrangement that worked well for everyone. The ranch prospered under Katherine and Mason's joint management. They expanded their herd, improved their breeding stock, and developed a reputation for quality cattle throughout the region. Other ranchers sought their advice, and gradually, the Zeller Ranch became one of the most respected operations in the valley. In 1879, Katherine became pregnant again. This time, she was more confident in her ability to balance motherhood with ranching. Their daughter, Grace Elizabeth, was born in the summer, a beautiful baby with Katherine's dark hair and Mason's gray-blue eyes. As their children grew, Katherine made sure to teach them that girls could do anything boys could do, and that strength came in many forms. She taught Grace to ride and rope alongside teaching her to read and manage household accounts. She taught Matthew to respect women as equals and to value kindness as much as courage. The water committee work continued, and Katherine remained an active voice in community decisions. She pushed for improvements to the school, argued for better roads, and advocated for treating all people with fairness regardless of their background. Not all of her initiatives succeeded, but enough did that Petaluma gradually became a more progressive and welcoming place. Mason supported Katherine in all of this while managing his own responsibilities on the ranch. Their partnership deepened with each passing year, built on mutual respect, genuine friendship, and enduring love. They still disagreed sometimes, still had moments of frustration, but they always came back to the foundation of trust and equality they had built. One evening in the spring of 1882, Katherine and Mason sat on their porch watching Matthew, now 4, and Grace, almost 3, play in the yard. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors, and the ranch spread out around them, prosperous and beautiful. "You ever regret it?" Mason asked. "Staying here, fighting so hard for acceptance, dealing with all the resistance and criticism?" Katherine thought about the question, then shook her head. "Not for a moment. This life, this place, our family, it's everything I wanted and more than I dreamed possible. Yes, it was hard. Yes, there were times I wanted to give up, but we built something real here, Mason, something that matters." "We did," Mason agreed. He reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. "And we're not done yet. There's still so much more we can do." Katherine smiled at him, this man who had seen her fire and had chosen to fan the flames rather than try to extinguish them. "What did you have in mind?" "I've been thinking about starting a program to help young women learn ranching," Mason said. "There must be others like you were, wanting a different kind of life but not knowing how to achieve it. We could teach them, give them opportunities." Catherine's heart swelled with love for her husband. Even after years of marriage, he could still surprise her with his progressive thinking and generous spirit. "That's a wonderful idea. We could start small, maybe take on 1 or 2 students to begin with." "I knew you'd like it," Mason said, grinning. "We could advertise in San Francisco, maybe even back east. Give young women a chance to learn a trade and a way of life that most people think isn't available to them." As they continued to discuss possibilities and make plans, Catherine reflected on how far she had come from that first day in the town meeting, when she had walked in wearing trousers and challenged every tradition. She had faced opposition, criticism, and doubt, but she had never wavered in her determination to live life on her own terms, and she had found something she had not even known to look for: a partner who loved her not despite her unconventional spirit but because of it. Mason had not tried to change her or diminish her fire. Instead, he had helped her build a life where that fire could burn bright and strong, illuminating the way for others who might follow. The program to teach young women ranching skills launched the following year. Their first student was a girl named Sarah from Sacramento, 19 years old, and determined to escape an arranged marriage her family had planned. Catherine saw so much of her younger self in Sarah and poured energy into teaching her everything she knew about cattle ranching, business management, and how to stand up for yourself in a world that often tried to silence women's voices. Over the next several years, more young women came to learn from Catherine and Mason. Some stayed in the area and started their own small ranches. Others took their skills elsewhere, spreading the idea that women could be successful ranchers throughout California and beyond. Catherine took pride in each success story, knowing she was helping create opportunities for women that had barely existed when she first arrived in Petaluma. The town itself continued to change. By the mid-1880s, Petaluma had grown considerably, with new businesses opening and more progressive attitudes taking root. Catherine was no longer the scandalous woman in trousers. She was a respected community leader whose opinion was sought on important matters. She served on the school board, helped establish a lending library, and continued her work on the water committee. Bernard Crawford, who had once been her greatest adversary, became something of an unlikely ally. He never became warm or friendly exactly, but he respected Catherine's knowledge and supported most of her initiatives. When he retired from ranching in 1885, he publicly credited Catherine's water allocation system with helping save his ranch during a particularly dry period. Catherine and Mason's children grew healthy and happy. Matthew showed an early aptitude for ranching and loved working alongside his parents. Grace was more bookish, but also loved riding and proved to have an excellent head for the business side of ranching. Catherine made sure both children understood that they could choose their own paths in life, whether that meant staying on the ranch or pursuing other dreams. In 1886, Catherine gave birth to their third child, another daughter they named Rose Marie. The birth was more difficult than the previous two, and the doctor advised Catherine against having more children. Catherine accepted this with a mixture of sadness and relief. She loved her children deeply, but 3 seemed like a good number, and she was eager to focus more energy on the ranch and her various community projects. As Rose grew, she proved to be the most spirited of their children, with a fierce independence that reminded everyone of her mother. Catherine delighted in her youngest daughter's bold personality and made sure Rose knew that being strong-willed was a virtue, not a flaw. The ranch continued to prosper through the late 1880s and into the 1890s. Katherine and Mason expanded their operations, adding more acreage and increasing their herd size. They also diversified, adding horses to their cattle operation and developing a breeding program that produced some of the finest working horses in California. Through all of this, Katherine and Mason's love for each other only deepened. They still made time for each other despite the demands of ranching and raising 3 children. They took evening rides together when they could, sat on the porch after the children were in bed and talked about their days, and always treated each other with respect and affection. In the fall of 1892, Petaluma held a celebration for its 50th anniversary as an incorporated town. As part of the festivities, several long-time residents were honored for their contributions to the community. Katherine was surprised and touched to be included among them. Standing at the podium in front of most of the town, Katherine looked out at the crowd. She saw Mason beaming at her from the front row, their children beside him. She saw the young women she had trained, now successful ranchers in their own right. She saw faces that had once looked at her with disapproval now showing respect and appreciation. When I first came to Petaluma 16 years ago, Katherine began, I was told that a woman had no place running a ranch or participating in community decisions. I was told to conform, to follow tradition, to know my place. She paused, meeting the eyes of people in the crowd. I'm grateful I didn't listen to that advice. There was laughter and applause, and Katherine continued. This town has taught me that change is possible, that traditions can evolve, and that courage and determination can overcome prejudice. But I've also tried to teach this town something. That women are capable of far more than society traditionally allows, and that our community is stronger when everyone has the opportunity to contribute their talents and abilities. The applause was thunderous, and Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. She saw Mason mouth the words, I love you, and she smiled at him. I'm honored to call Petaluma home, Katherine concluded. And I'm grateful to everyone who gave me a chance, who stood beside me, and who helped create a place where women like me could thrive. Most of all, I'm grateful to my husband, Mason Zeller, who loved my fire and fanned the flames. Together, we've built something that I hope will last for generations. As Katherine stepped down from the podium, Mason met her and pulled her into an embrace. I'm so proud of you, he whispered, and I love you more than words can say. I love you too, Katherine said. Every day, more and more. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the rhythms of ranch life. Matthew grew into a skilled rancher and eventually married a smart, capable woman named Rebecca, who reminded Katherine very much of herself when she was younger. Grace attended college in San Francisco, studying business, but returned to help manage the financial side of the ranch operations. Rose, true to form, decided to become a veterinarian, one of the very few women in the profession, and brought her skills back to Petaluma to care for animals throughout the valley. Katherine and Mason aged together, their hair graying, their faces weathering from years of outdoor work, but their love remaining strong and vibrant. They became grandparents, delighting in Matthew and Rebecca's children and eventually in the children of their daughters as well. In 1905, when Katherine was 51 and Mason was 55, they decided to step back from the day-to-day management of the ranch and turn operations over to Matthew, though they remained active advisors and still rode out to check on cattle whenever they felt like it. This gave them more time to travel, to spend with their grandchildren, and to simply enjoy each other's company. One evening, they rode together to a favorite spot on their property, a high meadow with a view of the entire valley. They had come here often over the years, in times of joy and times of struggle, and it had become a special place for them. "You remember that first day at the town meeting?" Mason asked as they sat on a fallen log, watching the sun set. "How could I forget?" Katherine said with a laugh. "I thought Mayor Milton was going to have apoplexy when I walked in wearing trousers." "I thought you were the bravest person I'd ever seen," Mason said. "Standing there in front of all those hostile men, refusing to back down. That's when I started falling in love with you." "I noticed you that day too," Katherine admitted. "You were the only one who spoke up for me, the only one who seemed to think I had a right to be there." "Best decision I ever made," Mason said. He took her hand, his weathered fingers warm around hers. "Supporting you, loving you, building this life with you. None of it was what I expected when I was young, but it's been so much better than anything I could have imagined." Katherine leaned her head on his shoulder, contentment washing over her. "We did well, didn't we? The ranch, the children, the way we've lived our lives." "We did more than well," Mason said. "We changed things, Katherine, not just for us but for all the women who came after you. You opened doors that had been closed, and you did it with such grace and strength." "We did it together," Katherine corrected. "I could never have succeeded without you beside me, supporting me, believing in me." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The valley below was peaceful, dotted with ranches and farmhouses, including the properties of several women who had trained under Katherine and Mason. "I want you to know," Mason said quietly, "that loving you, standing beside you, watching you chase your dreams and change the world around you, has been the greatest privilege of my life." Katherine felt tears slide down her cheeks. Even after nearly 30 years of marriage, Mason could still move her with his words. "You didn't just stand beside me," she said. "You fanned my flames when others wanted to extinguish them. You believed in me even when I doubted myself. You loved me for who I was, not who society thought I should be. That's a gift I can never fully repay." "You don't need to repay it," Mason said, pulling her close. "Loving you is reward enough. Watching you thrive and succeed and become everything you were meant to be, that's all I've ever wanted." As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the sky above them, Katherine and Mason rode slowly back toward their ranch house. The lights glowing in the windows welcomed them home, representing not just a physical structure, but the life they had built together through love, partnership, and mutual respect. Their children and grandchildren often visited, filling the house with laughter and energy. Katherine loved having them around, loved seeing her daughters pursue their own dreams with the same determination she had shown, loved watching her son manage the ranch with skill and fairness. The training program for young women ranchers continued, now run primarily by Grace when she was home from San Francisco, and by some of the women Katherine had trained in earlier years. The program had expanded beyond just ranching skills to include business management, veterinary basics, and even lessons in how to navigate a male-dominated world with confidence and dignity. Petaluma continued to grow and change, becoming increasingly progressive and diverse. The water committee that Katherine had once fought so hard to join now included 2 other women as regular members. The town council had elected its first female member in 1903, and while there was still resistance to women's participation in public life, the barriers were slowly crumbling. Katherine watched these changes with satisfaction, knowing that her refusal to conform had played a role in opening doors for others. She received letters from women across the West who had heard about her and drew inspiration from her story. Some of those women visited the ranch, seeking advice or just wanting to meet the woman who had challenged traditions and won. Through it all, Mason remained Catherine's greatest supporter and her truest love. Even as they aged, their attraction to each other remained strong. They still held hands when they walked, still kissed with passion, still looked at each other with love and desire. Their partnership had weathered every storm and emerged stronger each time. In 1908, they celebrated their 31st wedding anniversary with a large party at the ranch. All three of their children were there with their families, along with friends from throughout the valley, students Katherine had trained over the years, and even some of the people who had once opposed her presence in the community. During the party, Matthew stood to offer a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught me that love means supporting each other's dreams, that marriage is a partnership between equals, and that challenging unjust traditions is not just acceptable but necessary. Thank you for showing all of us what true love looks like." There was enthusiastic applause, and then Grace stood as well. "And thank you, Mother, for showing me that women can accomplish anything we set our minds to. You've been my inspiration every day of my life." Rose, never one to be left out, jumped up. "And thank you for being stubborn and fierce, and refusing to let anyone tell you what you could or could not do. The world needs more women like you, and I'm proud to be your daughter." Katherine was crying openly now, and Mason wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "Your turn," he whispered. "Say something." Katherine stood, wiping her tears, and looked around at the gathered crowd. 31 years ago, I married the best man I've ever known," she began. "Mason saw me not as a woman who needed to be controlled or changed, but as a partner, an equal, someone whose fire should be celebrated and encouraged. He loved me at my most difficult, supported me at my most vulnerable, and celebrated with me at my most triumphant. Whatever I've accomplished, whatever doors I've opened, I couldn't have done it without him." She turned to look at Mason, her heart full of love. "You fanned my flames, my darling, and in doing so, you helped light the way for so many others. I love you more now than I did on our wedding day, and I will love you until my last breath." Mason pulled her into a kiss, and the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. As Katherine stood there in her husband's arms, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, and the community they had helped shape, she felt complete contentment. She had lived her life on her own terms, had fought for what she believed in, and had found profound love with a man who valued her strength rather than fearing it. The years that followed were peaceful and happy. Katherine and Mason spent their time between the ranch and occasional trips to San Francisco or Sacramento. They attended their grandchildren's school events, helped with major decisions about the ranch operation, and continued to mentor young women seeking to break into ranching or other male-dominated fields. In 1912, when Katherine was 58, she received an invitation to speak at a women's suffrage rally in San Francisco. Although she had not been heavily involved in the organized suffrage movement, her story had become well known among activists as an example of what women could achieve when given opportunities. Katherine accepted the invitation, and Mason accompanied her to San Francisco for the event. Standing before a crowd of hundreds of women and supportive men, Katherine spoke about her experiences in Petaluma, about challenging traditions, and about the importance of women having equal rights and opportunities. "I was fortunate," Katherine told the crowd. "I found a community that eventually accepted me and a husband who supported me in my ambitions. But not every woman is so fortunate. Too many women are told their dreams don't matter, that their capabilities don't count, that their voices shouldn't be heard. That must change. Women must have the right to vote, to own property, to pursue careers, to make decisions about our own lives. And men who truly love women will support that cause, because real love means wanting your partner to reach their full potential. The speech was widely covered in newspapers throughout California, and Katherine received numerous letters from women thanking her for her words and her example. She was gratified by the response, but insisted that she was just one woman among many fighting for equality and justice. As Katherine entered her 60s, she began to slow down physically, though her mind remained as sharp as ever. She suffered from occasional joint pain, a legacy of years of ranch work, and she could no longer ride all day the way she once had. But she remained active and engaged, still participating in water committee meetings, still advising on ranch decisions, still mentoring young women. Mason aged alongside her, his hair now completely white, his face deeply lined but still handsome in Katherine's eyes. He dealt with his own physical limitations, but they adapted together, finding new ways to enjoy their life and each other's company. Their grandchildren were now teenagers and young adults, preparing to make their own ways in the world. Katherine delighted in seeing her influence on the younger generation. The way her granddaughters spoke confidently about their ambitions and dreams, the way her grandsons treated women with respect and equality. In the spring of 1915, Katherine and Mason celebrated their 38th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner at home, just the two of them. They had declined their children's offers of a party, wanting simply to be together. 38 years, Katherine said, marveling at how quickly the time had passed. When I think about that scared young woman who walked into the town meeting in trousers, I can hardly believe it was me. You were never scared, Mason said with a smile. Nervous maybe, but never scared. You've always been the bravest person I know. I was terrified, Katherine admitted, but I refused to let fear stop me, and finding you, building this life with you, made all the fear and struggle worthwhile. Mason reached across the table and took her hand. I asked you once if you ever regretted staying here, fighting so hard. Do you remember what you said? Not for a moment, Katherine replied. And I still mean it. This life, our love, our family, everything we've built together is exactly what I wanted, even when I didn't know to want it. They finished their dinner and went out to sit on the porch, as they had done countless times over the decades. The ranch spread out before them, prosperous and beautiful in the spring twilight. In the distance, they could see Matthew and Rebecca's house, and the barn where Grace was working on ranch accounts, and the veterinary office Rose had established on the property. We did good, Mason said softly. With the ranch, with our children, with our life together. We made something that will last long after we're gone. We did, Katherine agreed. She leaned against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and thought about all the years that had brought them to this moment. The challenges they had faced, the love they had built, the changes they had helped create. I wouldn't change a single thing. Mason kissed the top of her head. Neither would I. Loving you has been the greatest adventure of my life. They sat together as darkness fell and the stars came out. Two people who had chosen to challenge tradition and build a life based on equality, respect, and profound love. Around them, the ranch was quiet and peaceful, a testament to what could be achieved when two people worked together as true partners. Katherine thought about the girl she had been when she arrived in Petaluma, determined to run her own ranch despite everyone telling her it was impossible. She thought about the woman she had become, someone who had not only achieved her own dreams, but had helped make it possible for other women to achieve theirs as well. And she thought about Mason, the cowboy who had seen her fire and chosen to fan the flames rather than try to extinguish them. The man who had stood beside her through every challenge, who had loved her exactly as she was, who had proven that true partnership between a man and a woman was not just possible but beautiful. As they finally stood to go inside for the night, Katherine took one last look at the valley below, at the land she had fought for and loved and helped shape. She felt proud of what she had accomplished, grateful for the love she had found, and hopeful for the future that her children and grandchildren would build. "I love you, Mason Zeller," she said, turning to face her husband in the starlight. "Thank you for giving me the freedom to be myself and the support to become more than I ever imagined I could be." "I love you too, Katherine Rosewood Zeller," Mason replied, pulling her close. "Thank you for challenging every tradition, for fighting for what you believed in, and for letting me be part of your incredible journey. You changed my life, and you changed this town, and I'm honored to have been by your side through all of it." They kissed then, with all the passion and tenderness of a love that had grown and deepened over nearly 4 decades. And as they walked inside together, hand in hand, they carried with them the knowledge that they had lived their lives fully, loved each other completely, and left the world a little better than they had found it. The years that followed were lived at a gentler pace, but with no less love or connection. Katherine and Mason became beloved elder figures in Petaluma, sought out for advice and wisdom. They watched with pride as Matthew expanded the ranch operations, as Grace applied her business expertise to help several small ranches in the area become more profitable, and as Rose became known throughout California as one of the finest veterinarians in the state. They celebrated the marriages of their grandchildren and welcomed the birth of great-grandchildren, marveling at how their family had grown and flourished. Each new generation carried forward the values Katherine and Mason had instilled: equality, respect, hard work, and the courage to challenge unjust traditions. In 1920, when California women gained the right to vote in federal elections, Katherine cast her ballot with tears of joy streaming down her face. Mason stood beside her at the polling place, holding her hand, as proud of her in that moment as he had been on their wedding day. The right she was exercising had been fought for by countless women over many decades, and Katherine felt honored to be part of that history. As Katherine entered her late 60s and then her 70s, she remained active in community affairs, though at a reduced level. She wrote letters to legislators about issues affecting rural communities, continued to advise the Water Committee, and maintained correspondence with women throughout the West, who sought her counsel on everything from ranching techniques to how to navigate marriage while maintaining independence. Mason, a few years older, remained Katherine's constant companion. When his health began to fail in his late 70s, Katherine nursed him with the same determination she had brought to every other challenge in her life. They had been together for more than 45 years, and she could not imagine life without him. But in the spring of 1924, Mason passed away peacefully in his sleep, Katherine lying beside him. He was 74 years old and had lived a full, rich life. Katherine grieved deeply, mourning not just the loss of her husband but the loss of her partner, her greatest supporter, her truest love. At Mason's funeral, Katherine spoke about the man he had been and the life they had built together. "Mason Zeller saw me for who I truly was," she said, her voice strong despite her tears, "and he loved that person with his whole heart. He didn't try to change me or diminish me. Instead, he helped me become the best version of myself. He fanned my flames when the world wanted to extinguish them, and in doing so, he showed what real love looks like. I am who I am today because Mason believed in me, supported me, and loved me without condition. He was my partner in every sense of the word, and I will carry him in my heart until we meet again." After Mason's death, Katherine lived quietly on the ranch, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She spent her days raiding, writing letters, and enjoying the land she and Mason had nurtured for so many years. She missed Mason terribly, but she found comfort in the knowledge that their love had been real and true, and that they had lived their years together to the fullest. She also found joy in watching the continuing changes in society. Women now had the vote, more opportunities for education and careers, and greater legal rights. The world was far from perfect, but it was better than it had been when Katherine first arrived in Petaluma wearing trousers and demanding a seat at the table. She took pride in knowing she had played a small part in those changes. On a warm June evening in 1928, Katherine sat on the porch of the ranch house, now surrounded by rose bushes her daughter Rose had planted years ago. She was 74 years old, the same age Mason had been when he died. She looked out at the valley, at the ranch she and Mason had built together, and she felt complete peace. Her children came to visit that evening, along with many of her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They gathered on the porch and in the yard, talking and laughing, sharing stories and memories. Katherine watched them all with deep contentment, seeing in them the legacy of the life she and Mason had lived. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in the brilliant colors she had loved for more than 50 years, Katherine felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had challenged every tradition that tried to limit her. She had found love with a man who had celebrated her fire and fanned her flames. Together, they had built something beautiful and lasting, a family and a legacy that would continue long after she was gone. When Katherine Rosewood Zeller passed away peacefully in her sleep a few weeks later, the entire town of Petaluma mourned. Her funeral was attended by hundreds of people, from elderly ranchers who remembered the controversy she had caused when she first arrived, to young women who had been inspired by her example to pursue their own unconventional dreams. In her will, Katherine left the ranch to her children equally, trusting them to continue the traditions of partnership and equality she and Mason had established. She also established a scholarship fund to help young women from rural areas attend college or vocational training, ensuring that future generations would have opportunities she had to fight so hard to create. The ranch continued to prosper under Matthew's management and eventually under his children's management. The training program for women ranchers continued for many decades, helping hundreds of women learn skills and gain confidence. And the water allocation system Katherine had fought for remained in place, a testament to her vision and determination. Years later, a historical marker was placed at the site of the original ranch house, commemorating Katherine Rosewood Zeller as a pioneering woman rancher who had challenged traditions and helped open doors for women in rural California. The marker included a quote from her speech at the Water Committee meeting. "Precedent isn't the same as fairness." But perhaps Katherine's greatest legacy was not the ranch or the programs or the historical recognition. It was the example she set of how to live an authentic life, of how to fight for what you believe in, and of how love between equals could create something truly beautiful. She had challenged every tradition that tried to limit her, and in doing so, she had helped create a world with fewer limits for the women who came after her. And through it all, she had loved and been loved by a man who saw her fire as something to be celebrated and encouraged rather than controlled. Mason Zeller had given Katherine the greatest gift one person can give another, the freedom to be fully herself. Together, they had built a life and a love that became legendary in Petaluma and beyond, a story passed down through generations as an example of what partnership and equality in marriage could look like. The story of Katherine and Mason became the kind of tale that families told their children, that grandmothers shared with granddaughters, that women remembered when they needed courage to challenge their own traditions. It was a love story, yes, but it was also a story about dignity and respect, about fighting for justice, and about the power of two people working together to create change. In the end, Katherine Rosewood Zeller had done exactly what she set out to do. She had run her own ranch, made her own decisions, and lived life on her own terms. And she had done it all while building a marriage based on equality and mutual respect, proving that women didn't have to choose between love and independence. With Mason beside her, fanning her flames, she had shown that the two could not only coexist but could strengthen and enhance each other. Their story, like the land they loved and the traditions they challenged, endured. And somewhere in Petaluma, California, on what had once been the Rosewood Ranch, their legacy continued, carried forward by generations of strong women, and the men who loved them enough to fan their flames rather than try to extinguish them.